Welcome to the Business of School podcast, brought to you by Cole Connect. Get ready for a journey of topical insights, engaging conversations, and maybe a few aha moments from the business, finance, and technology side of schools. Cole School experts are your host, and with our guests from the world of education, we're about to embark on a learning adventure to support you in the business of your school. We're exploring a leadership approach that goes beyond style, strategy, or skill. Conscious leadership. In a time when school leaders are navigating increasing complexity, increasing reliance on standardised tests as a measure of school success, increased pressure from stakeholder expectations, nervous school boards, and increasing focus on teacher burnout, media scrutiny, etc., we're asking, what does it mean to lead with awareness, purpose, and depth? Dr. Virginia Moller is an experienced educator, researcher, and leadership facilitator whose work spans strategic planning, governance, and systems leadership. Together, we'll unpack what conscious leadership looks like in practice, how it shows up in school strategy and culture, and why it matters now more than ever. Maybe let's start simply, Virginia. What do you mean by conscious leadership in the context of education?
In my experience as a principal, CEO, academic, lecturing on and researching on educational leadership and governance, the most eloquent notion of leadership comes from a person called Bob Anderson from the Leadership Circle. I've had quite an association with. Bob Anderson asks us to think about leadership as, intriguingly, the deployment of self into circumstances. And it takes leadership away from positional roles, though obviously they're very important, and allows us to see leadership throughout the organisation, positional and non-positional. And it allows questions like, how do we grow the self that leads? And how do we support people to lead from purpose, not just position?
So purpose instead of for position.
Yeah, leading purpose. And then that lets us consider conscious leadership as intentional, reflective, and developmental practice of that deployment of self. And it matters, as leadership is influence, if you want to think of it that way as well. And as your primary influence then is the you that shows up. And it's also shown to matter in a large body of research, and that has come out of the Leadership Circle, looking at effectiveness of organisations and the link between the level of consciousness and the effectiveness of an organisation itself. So the Leadership Circle talks about moving from reactive tendencies to creative competencies, and the reactive tendencies, such as leading to please, problems to be solved, reacting to the urgency of the moment, can be counterbalanced with the creative competencies that leaders can grow into with coaching, etc.
Yeah.
And they're the people who have courage to do things differently, driven by educational purpose, develop others, and they operate out of coherence and in what they do, what they say they do, and how they know they're doing it.
Yeah, excellent. Have you maybe provide an example of from a school circumstance where a leader may react to a challenge in one way, where another leader who is a more purpose-driven and creative might react to the same circumstance in a different way?
Yeah. Well, let's have a look at the broader landscape that leaders are operating in and boards. And it's a complex landscape with increasing accountabilities, increasing views of parents as consumers, nervous boards, media scrutiny, you name it, things are getting more complex. And within this, it seems that schools are driven by improving standardised test scores, which have become a proxy for educational purpose. So a reactive tendency would be to improve test scores so that we have satisfied parents, we have satisfied government, and we are a successful school. A more creative-driven leader or leadership would look at transforming that and looking at, yes, they're important but to speak back speak back to that misplaced focus on standardized tests and success, but in a way that doesn't denigrate the role of standardized testing, but for leaders to stand by their own clarity of purpose. And it's this purpose which sets the criteria by which a school is assessed. Leaders judged by and happy to be judged by coherence of purpose and practice, and who are able to make a sound, defensible argument about why a school is doing what it's doing and why.
Excellent, thank you. So Virginia, you work closely with schools on strategic planning. I'm curious to see how conscious leadership can influence schools' approach to strategy. Do you want to maybe talk a little bit more about that?
I would love to. So let's have a look at that troubled term, strategic planning. So strategy is not planning. And you put those two words together and the default position is people tend to gravitate towards the planning rather than the strategy. So strategy is how people think. It's embedded in how people think, decide, and relate, but not in isolation. So you look at strategic planning and it's a structured process and fits well with that right brain analytical focus, which is really, common in schools. So, and what happens is you do your solid research, you get the detail, and then off you go and you implement. Well, it's never that easy and never works, and strategic plans, more often than not, fail. So what do? If you look at strategic thinking and developing that capacity, it's hard and it requires prioritizing, interpreting, analyzing, insight, and it involves taking a helicopter view. It focuses on trends and insights, but it's very uncomfortable because it's much easier to assume that what's worked in the past will work in the future. You're just doing the same things, you're just doing them.
Yeah, keep doing what you've always done.
That's it, but a tiny bit differently. So so a strategic plan is so reassuring. It gives you a detailed plan of the journey. Here it is in your 30-page document, off you go. But in terms of true strategic thinking, it's picking a path. It's actually saying, okay, we know where we're going in 3 to 5 years or a bit more, and we're going to pick the best path possible to get there, knowing that we will have to adjust that because things change. You might have a review in a year and decide, okay, that's no longer applicable to us achieving our vision. And so it's adaptable. The way we work is adaptable to circumstances, and it builds capacity of the whole organisation. So what you might come up with is not a 30-page glossy document, but a 2-page, or we call it a vision action plan, which links coherently the higher context, which is values, purpose, and vision, to action, like goals and 90-day priorities, and measurables. They're not a dirty word, actual measurables, And the strategy is a way to connect that. And it's just prioritising. It's consciously prioritising what you're doing.
And so would you say adaptability was a big part of conscious leadership of strategy?
So the outcome of that is clarity and cohesion. And it's got to be seen within a strategy ecosystem. People need to have what they need to be response able to implement strategy and to think strategically together.
And how do leaders make sure that happens?
Okay, so within an ecosystem, again, being more conscious, you're reframing accountability, which is like having a noose around your neck, to responsibility. So, in terms of setting priorities, like a principal would also work with their teams. So, what are your priorities? What are your priority areas? How do you know you're doing a good job? And what's your own strategy to get there? So it's putting ownership and energizing the owner of the task or of the role or the function, and it's a way that's also flexible in that, and it's a tool, a conversation tool as well, that responsibility agreement. So instead of vague expectations of KPIs and whatever from the principal to the board, for instance, there's agreements. There's, okay, how does the board chair know that the principal is doing a good job? How does the principal report to the board on their strategic outcomes for that quarter or for the year? And it's a way of cohering people's intentions and their shared vision in a way that's very explicit and focused, but also creative.
Yeah, it's a much more effective form of evaluation of individuals and also the whole organisation. Maybe we could talk a little bit more about another term now as well, generative thinking. Because I know the governance research that you've been involved in highlights the importance of generative thinking. What does that look like when you're interacting with school boards and leadership teams?
So, interestingly, we have to look again at the broader context and the enormous changes in governance in the last 5 to 10 years, and we all feel it. I've spoken about that before. But more and more, and I said nervous boards before, increasingly boards are becoming risk averse due to that broader, more performative education policy settings and registration requirements, volatility, etc. So boards also are getting confused about who their actual stakeholders are, and that's in terms of, like, are we? Is it parents who are our stakeholders? Are we answerable to the parents? I would say no. And I would say the board needs to relate back to something or some entity that holds them accountable. If there's not that accountability group, then they need to be accountable for purpose, for the educative purpose, not to parents.
So have you, some of the schools you've worked with, who are they bringing in as a stakeholder to keep them accountable in that way?
Okay, very good point. In the independent school sector, of course, the buck stops with the board to all intents and purposes. But, I mean, there can be the board members, or it can be if it's they link to a diocese, or if, it's got to be some group that there is that conscious accountability for educative purpose. it's I think that's one of the trickiest areas for boards to actually come to terms with. And the other tricky area is boards actually knowing who they are. Are they, and this is part of our research as well, are they fiduciary boards where they are just all about fiduciary duties, risk? Are they strategic boards? If they are, how do they show that? And a generative board is something very different. A generative board actually invites risk and uncertainty in thinking, and that's getting quite rare. A generative board enables the resources and political conditions to foster a more collaborative and forward-thinking relationship between the board chair and the principal, for instance.
Maybe, Virginia, just could you describe what does a generative board look like?
So as part of our research, we actually researched into the dynamics of an effective board chair principal relationship in varied independent school contexts, and how the dynamics contribute to the success of the school in terms of the school's value, mission and vision. And as part of that, we made recommendations that it is really important for a board to know who it is, and looking at the levels, modes of board operation, fiduciary, strategic, generative, and how they impact on boards' capacity to actually lead. So a generative board, as distinct from a fiduciary board, which is risk averse, a generative board invites risk and uncertainty in thinking, and it enables the resources to foster a more collaborative and forward-thinking relationship between board chairs and principals. So a generative board sets up the conditions, for instance, for going beyond that, I feel, rather ridiculous, I must stay in my lane as a board director, and I must stay in or you must stay in your lane as a principal. And, there's this line that boards and principals shouldn't cross. In generative thinking, you're thinking about how can we navigate those spaces together. It's not managing operations and governance, it's navigating. And so a generative board, sets the conditions for that to happen, so that the board chair and the principal can co-lead. Like, there's that idea of coherence again, co-lead with what we've come up with, our term, educative governance. And out of the research, educative governance is learning together.
And it comes back to what you said right at the outset, between the comparison between position and purpose.
That's it, exactly. So it's beyond roles, it's beyond stay in your lane. And that level of thinking will generate new possibilities. It's like form follows function. So if you're aiming to really transform what you're doing, then there's no point having a board meeting where the principal just talks about, updates the board on what they're doing. And there's no time for that, even that blue sky thinking at a board level. So the structures aren't set up for that to even happen. Then you get what you set up.
And I think, and there's a need there for a balance as well, because my next question was going to talk about how does conscious leadership help principals and boards hold evidence-based practice alongside the other elements of the organisation, like culture, purpose, context.
Perfect. Yeah, that's really important because it's not either or, it's and. So if you can think in terms of like a leader who is able to hold those multiple perspectives in tension with one, like creative tension with one another, is more successful and less reactive. So, as I was saying before, that mindset in terms of Keegan calls it self-authoring mind, where, like in a reactive mind or a socialized mind, I am what I do. In a self-authoring mind, I am and I do. So it's looking at being able to leverage the best of both for the good of the school and for the educational purpose. So you can do both. You can stand up and speak back, and you need to do that in a way that doesn't denigrate the role of standardised testing or cover up genuine failings in the school.
So how does that piece help us to understand whole systems leadership? Get that balance between integrating the various aspects, especially when dealing with change. Can you maybe talk a little bit about that, Virginia?
Yeah. Look, another tool and another frame that we use, and I've used over quite a period of time to support schools, is to look at this thing called the 4 quadrants by a person called Ken Wilber. And he was looking at a whole systems lens where you're integrating across multiple dimensions, and it helped. So you're looking at people's individual growth. You're looking at reflection individually and individual dispositions, but you're also looking at building capacity, collective capacity, skill development. But a lot of schools ignore culture. They are so fixated on structure and not culture. So in culture is where the shared meanings are. There might be fractured understandings about purpose. There are, no one really is held by a consciously held sort of vision. And then you've got the systems and the structures which we all love, which is governance policies, workflows, communication flows. But most change efforts focus on that lower right: systems, processes, structures.
It has its place and it's important, but it's not everything.
Exactly. So you miss out on any of those quadrants and you're probably doomed to fail, actually. So change won't be sustainable. And in work in schools, that resonates so much with leaders because they can see where they are, what they're not addressing, and more often than not, it's the culture that then they're not leading culture, they're reacting to it.
Yeah, that's good. That's very thoughtful. So maybe overall, Virginia, as we sort of try and reflect on what you've been talking about, conscious leadership, is it just another trendy leadership style, or is it something else? Is it a way of being? How would you describe it, especially in relationship to schools?
So in all my research, I have quite an aversion to adjectival leadership. So you name a leadership: instructional, servant, transformational, ethical. There's a lot, isn't there? Now, conscious leadership, you could put it in that box. However, it's not a thing. It's not something, it's not a style, but it's a way of being, as you said. So it's developmental. It's just not something you either have or you don't. It's about
who you are,
evolving how we know ourselves. Yeah, it's who. It's the who of leadership. In fact, I developed with a colleague a mentoring program for mentors to develop their mentor capacity, but we're actually not focusing on skills and having difficult conversations and whatever people do need in terms of skills, but it's the who of the mentor. Who is the mentor that shows up to the mentee?
It's a little less of what is my role to lead this team. It's about who am I and how am I leading?
Oh, totally. And that has a big effect on leadership teams. And then leadership capacity, collective leadership capacity, can be consciously developed in teams as well.
Absolutely. It can be a very much part of your culture.
Yeah, and we work with schools on that as well. So from reactive to creative, from self-authoring to self-transforming is the foundation of transformation.
That's been really fascinating conversation today, Virginia. Really appreciate you sharing things that you've seen in your experience with school and what you've seen in your research, and really hope that schools get a lot out of that and really think about who they are and what they're doing in their influence in the school sector. So thank you so much for joining us today on the podcast.
Oh, look, it's been a pleasure, actually. And can I just say one, to bring it down into real simplicity?
Absolutely, go for it.
And we think of Carl Jung. He was really onto something when he said the reason why consciousness exists and why there's an urge to widen and deepen it is very simple. Because without consciousness, things go less well. It's simple.
Simple as that. Excellent.
Yeah, it's as simple as that.
Thank you very much for your insights today.
Okay.
Take care.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
And that's a wrap for this episode of the Business of School podcast. We've enjoyed the conversation today and would love to have you join us for future episodes. Please hit the subscribe button and follow the links below to find more information and resources to support you and your school team. Until next time, keep being innovative, keep being awesome, and remember, there is always opportunity to improve on the journey. Thanks for connecting.